Hi everyone, it's Josh. Welcome to my bookish voyage. Today is a very exciting video because I'm going to be talking to you about my November reading plans. Now, November to me is a big month for a lot of reasons. I mean, we're approaching the end of the year. It's the period where my mind switches like a full 180 from Halloween-themed books to nonfiction November. This is my nonfiction November TBR. I'm reading exclusively nonfiction. This is one of the few month-long readathons that I actually get invested in. I get really excited about it because it gives me a chance to really dive in to all the nonfiction books I need to read. Now, I try to read nonfiction all year round, but you know, sometimes you just don't get to as much as you want to, and it's nice to have a month dedicated just to it. I have a remarkable amount of books that I am so eager to read. I posted a picture on my Instagram a week or so ago of all the books I wanted to read when I first thought to myself, what do I want to put in my TBR? And it was an ungodly number. It was impossible. I cut those numbers in half, and it still wasn't enough, so I trimmed it down even more. And then I did my stats video for the last 2 quarters, and I realized there were some things that I was not satisfied with. So I ended up completely reshaping my TBR yet again to try and target some of those lackluster diversity numbers. Basically just to be aware of the fact that there were certain areas that I want to read about that I'm just not doing. So I've re-catered my list here, but even still, as much as I have trimmed down this TBR to a very, it hurts, you have no idea, like it severely hurts to have to cut it down so small, but at the same time I know it's impossible. That said, this final product may still be a little impossible. I believe I can easily get 2 books a week, 2,500 pages in a month. That is the equivalent of 8 books about. And what I have here is 13 books, which means if I'm really pushing it, I need to do 3 books a week. And November is a big month for a number of reasons, because part of it's I'm going to be traveling, it turns out, in early November, and that'll be a fun vlogging experience. I get to go home, visit my family, which could hurt my reading, or the traveling could actually help my reading, depending on how much time I'm spent walking and moving around. Nevertheless, I am aiming high and I'm hoping for the best. My TBR is split between basically physical and a lot of NetGalley arcs for 2 reasons. End of the year, we're approaching the end of the year, and I want to get as many arcs as I can done, but also because I'm realizing part of the reason I'm not reading diversely is because I just don't have a lot of diverse books when it comes to my TBR, as much as I tried to prepare for this non-buying of books year, and I just have more diversity on my NetGalley shelf, which makes it easier to mush in here, which is something I'll be talking about in my goals for next year. For now, let's get into technically my TBR, but really it's just my reading plans. I don't think I can get through all of this, but I'm sure Excel going to try. It's really going to be which books call to me during the month. I've tried to make it a good selection, a reasonable selection, but one that will inevitably end up not being entirely read. Enough preamble, let us begin. I'm going to start with my physical books here. Here's one that I wasn't going to put on here, but it says What is Life by Ewan Schrödinger. You know, Schrödinger's cat, whatnot. This is his definition, his essay on the nature of life. Now, life is a big question, and like the definition of it may seem simple, but it's actually much more complicated than you think. Think of something like a fire. A fire is self-replicating, it's reproducing, it can grow and change to adapt to its environment. But it, of course, is not alive. Viruses are much more akin to life than fire, but at the same time, those are not alive. And these are things you have to tackle or consider when considering what is life by definition. And this is one of the earliest attempts to do that. So I'm really excited to look at this from an astrobiological perspective. This is one that I wouldn't say is a high priority, as fascinated as I am by it. I'm fascinated by everything on my shelf, obviously. But I picked it up ultimately because it's one of my older books, one of the many stats that I realized I was not quite tackling. So I chose to prioritize it for this month. Next is actually an arc about one that I ended up buying last year thinking I was going to read it. So The Janus Point by Julian Barber. And this one was not going to be on my TBR this month just because I found his first book very hard to read, not very accessible, not very well written, all those sort of going hand in hand. But this one, in addition to it being an arc that I really need to read for over a year now, it's also been adapted to audio now, so it might be a lot easier for me to get to. If I end up having to push some of the sides, I feel like it's going to be one of the last ones that I pick up, because I have other science books that I'm going to talk about that will likely chopping this one is because they're more interesting to me, to be quite frank. One of those books is also one of the oldest books on my TBR, and a book that I keep postponing for like over a year now, and that is Galileo's Daughter, Historical Memoir of Science, Faith, and Love by David Sobel. David Sobel being a science writer who often focuses on women in science, but not exclusively, and this is exactly as it sounds. I think it'll be a lot of fun. This is one that I'm going to be prioritizing. It is a chunker, not going to lie, but I think her books tend to be pretty easy to read, with some exceptions, but this one is really popular, so I suspect it will be pretty easy to get into. I'm going to skip over this one and do my last physical science book. Actually, there's one more physical science book. Atul Gawande, Being Mortal, Medicine, and what matters in the end. So this is about two things. His life as a doctor, as a surgeon, but also contemplating what it means to die, what life means, and to end, to be mortal. Something that I think I first heard about from Olive, sorry. She talked so highly of this book, if I remember correctly, and I imagine it'll be actually a very emotional book that I severely look forward to. Severely, that's a dark way of describing it. I'm really looking forward to it. Okay, one more science book. That's my physical TBR. It's actually more of a history science book. Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind, Yuval Noah Harari, A Brief History of Humankind. And I've heard great things about this author. I bought 2 of his books, and while as excited as I am to read this, like completely excited, it's one of the newest books that I own, which is why I was hesitant to put it on my TBR. But ultimately, I chose it for a few reasons. It's interesting, but besides it just being really interesting, the reason I decided to prioritize it over some of my older books, some other books that I was really excited to read too, is because he's both queer and not American. 2 things that are very important to me that have been underrepresented in my reading a lot lately. Let's move on to another memoir here. Actually, the final memoir. It's really quite sad. Mom and Me and Mom by Maya Angelou. And I give myself a 50-50 shot of reading this. Like, I really want to, but I have so many things that I want to read. As enjoyable and as quick a reading as will be, I also don't want it to end. Like, it's something very satisfying to have read through all 6 of her memoirs. There was some point in my life where I thought, that's never going to happen because it's on audio. And I managed to do it. At some point, it helped that I got a Kindle that I could do text-to-speech. But it feels very good, but also very sad to reach this point. And whether or not I get to this, I'm not sure. It's one that I want to get to, but one that I haven't necessarily settled that I'm ready to do that yet. But I think it'll be really good. I'm pretty sure she narrates this one. It says about her mother and her grandmother. If you don't know, first off, we should read her first memoir, I Know What the Caged Bird Sings. This is her life, her relationship with her mother and her grandmother is very unique because her grandmother raised her, but she still had that relationship with her mother. And I remember in one of her, I think it was either the 5th or the 6th memoir, when her grandmother died. I read it, less than a year, but not that soon after my grandmother died, but I really felt that connection, because I just recently lost my own grandmother. So I love that emotional connection that I can get often from her books. It's just so very apparent, especially when she's reading it herself. Now, I really want to read it again. I can't not read it, but I also don't want it to end. Next is another book that I chose to read, and that is Hate Monger by Jean Guerrero. And this is about Stephen Miller, Donald Trump, and the white nationalist agenda. And that all sounds very, in your face. But to put it quite frankly, Stephen Miller was a top advisor to Donald Trump, and he had direct, overt ties to white nationalist groups and white nationalist rhetoric, something that we now see or repeated still on Fox News by the likes of Tucker Carlson. The point is, this is about Stephen Miller. I think there's a good chance that I read this, one from a real heightened intellectual curiosity. It's pretty short, and I think it'll be actually very engaging read. Politics, especially for someone like me who is really into politics, has the ability to really encapsulate the reader, I think, especially when it's told well. And I have high hopes for this. Another one that touches on history and some politics, but also just this sort of autobiography and life of Hattie McDaniel, Black Ambition in White Hollywood. She was one of the first Black women to really be a big name in Hollywood. I believe she was the first Black woman to win an Oscar, I think it was. Part of it was that she was a very talented actress, from my understanding. I don't know much about her, hence me reading this, but she's a very talented actress who was given a lot of, caricature roles, because that's the way Hollywood was at the time. And I think this book is going to talk about that, her experience, what that was like. Now, it's worth noting that Jill Watts wrote The Black Cabinet, which I read last year and absolutely loved, my best book book, best favorite nonfiction book, and probably my favorite book of last year, if I'm being honest. So I have extremely high hopes. Like, this wasn't on my 5-star prediction list, but I can tell you, I expect it to be 5 stars. I also add that if you're interested in reading this or The Black Cabinet, Jill Watts is a white author, if that matters to you. She's a white woman, a white historian, white professor historian, who focuses, I think, on black history. At least part of her work is on black history, rather. Moving on to the arcs that I have set to read, and I feel like I feel like I have a good chance of getting through all of these, even though I said I wouldn't necessarily get through all of them. The ones that I'll likely end up pushing off is going to be for the arcs. Arcs always seem to be secondary, and whether or not I get to an arc is going to be whether or not I feel very compelled to read an arc over what I have here on a physical shelf. Sometimes recently, at least, I've just been reading arcs that weren't even on my TBR because I felt the power of books compelled me. So there were 6 here, so a lot of arcs that I have listed as that I want to read. Let's start with ones that I think I have a good chance of reading. One Beat at a Time, which is a book that is about an indigenous two-spirit individual who I believe is also queer in addition to being two-spirit. And this was one that I got as an audio arc last year that I had yet to read, or at least a while back. And I feel like this being also the indigenous readathon this month, I think this is a good time to finally get to that. It's one that I really wanted to read for a long time. It also helps with my queer representation that I've been looking for, or that I've been lacking this last quarter or so. Next, we have Raising Them, one that I'm also interested in. I got this description wrong. It's a book by a non-binary author telling their story of raising their child with their partner in gender non-conforming ways. The idea isn't that their child is necessarily trans or non-binary. Rather, it's about showing the importance of not applying a specific gender to a child in their childhood before they're old enough to truly identify what their gender actually is. I believe it has tools on parenting techniques on how to do this, while also just being a general discussion of their life. I will admit, there's something about this book that just didn't quite appeal to me. Like, I'm not a parent. I don't see myself being a parent anytime soon. But this will add to my queer rep and also just give me more trans and non-binary perspectives, something that I realized was severely lacking the last couple of quarters. A History of Scars is a memoir written by Laura Lee, I believe postdoc or grad student, I think a grad student of none other than Roxane Gay. And so this is her memoir. Knowing Roxane Gay, it's hard not to have extremely high expectations for this. Laura Lee is herself queer and Asian American. I think she's Korean American, and this is her life experience. Maybe, I'm not sure if it's a set of essays or strictly a memoir, but I expect it to be on par with Roxane Gay. Perhaps that is a little too unfair, but considering that she was her mentor, I think it's a fair expectation. So this is one that I've also been wanting to read for the longest time, and I, quite frankly, given its connections to Roxane Gay, I think there's a good chance that I will prioritize it this month. I explained about a bunch of these, but anyways. Next is The Library of Fragile History, which is coming out in mid-November. An arc that I requested, even though I told myself I wouldn't. There's nothing diverse about this guy. He's a white man. I blame Olive from Book Olive. She talked about this in her nonfiction TBR and recommendations, and it sounded so interesting. A history of the Library of Libraries. And I requested it, and it automatically gave it to me, and I hate myself. I hate myself for doing this to myself. But now I need to read it, and I honestly won't lie, I do really want to read it. Whether or not I get to it, I guess we will see. And then lastly is another one that was not from Book Olive, but it was one that I heard about on a podcast that I also got approved on NetGalley. At least this author is a diverse perspective, but the focus for the book isn't, though, so it's not really as important. Being You, a new theory of consciousness. This is by Anil Seth, and this was one that has been spoken about on the Mindscape podcast with Sean Carroll, who's written many of these books that I love. They were talking about this consciousness in general. Consciousness is something that I find really fascinating, something that I think is obviously foundational to who we are. I have the very non-expert opinion of consciousness being a collage of different things, a combination of different attributes that come from our mind that come together to form what we see as consciousness. That is a number of different processes that all come together to give the illusion of self and independence. That's based off of the very limited stuff that I've heard. Honestly, I've never actually read a book strictly on consciousness, so I am intrigued to see what this scientist has to say on what we know about consciousness and where it comes from. And that's it. Those are all the books that I'm officially putting on my potential reading list for November. And knowing what happened last year, I probably won't get to all of them, especially since I'm traveling. That doesn't seem to bode well for reading. But I'm certainly going to try. I believe there was enough on this list to keep me interested. And October's been really good. Part of that was because I DNF'd a book right away, and I feel like if I can keep that same energy, November has the possibility of being really good too. Even if I don't read all of them, getting to a lot of good ones is all that really matters, right? Getting to the good books in my life and ignoring the bad ones. Anyways, I am so very excited for November. I'm psyched. I am so psyched to be doing all these amazing books, to get to go to Washington, D.C. for the second time in my life, and to see my family. Oh, and I'm getting a new phone, the new Pixel. I'm so excited for that, because it's also going to act as a new camera for my channel. Hopefully, an upgrade in my video qualities, which I am psyched for. I'm so psyched for this month. November. I guess it's my new favorite month. What happened in October, I don't know. But November, hello, I love you, and let's get on with it. Thank you all for watching. If you made it this far, give me a stack of book emojis in the comments. And as always, hope you stay safe, and I will see you all next time. Bye.